Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn massive amounts of dense research into instantly usable knowledge. Today, we are cracking the code on better systems, systems for personal growth, for understanding how you're influenced, and maybe most importantly, for optimizing the core biological engine that runs it all.
It's a huge undertaking, yeah. But the central kind of beautiful takeaway from our sources today is actually deceptively simple. Massive success doesn't require massive action. We're talking about the profound, quiet power of tiny gains.
You know, when I saw the math the sources laid out, I actually had to stop and double check it. If you manage to get just 1% better every single day for a year, you end up 37 times better by the end.
That sounds almost like hyperbole. How did they get that figure? It's
Yeah.
astonishing. It really is. It's basically the magic of compounding, but applied to behavior. Most people, they look for the massive leap, that single transformation. But real success is just the product of daily habits. They operate like compound interest. Getting 1% better daily means you consistently reinvest that small gain back into the system. It creates this positive feedback loop.
And the flip side is true too.
Yeah, exactly. Conversely, if you get just 1% worse each day, those tiny losses compound downwards until you decline almost to zero. That slight change in your trajectory, that's what defines your destination.
So that accumulation of marginal gains, that's precisely the blueprint we're looking at today. We structured this deep dive to give you actionable frameworks for, well, self-improvement, but also defense against external influence, and anchoring it all in that critical foundation, sleep science. The goal is really for you to walk away with a clear strategy for optimizing behavior.
And, to really ground this whole philosophy, we've got the perfect foundational story. It's about the strategy of the aggregation of marginal gains used by British cycling coach Dave Brailsford.
Right, British cycling, this team was, they were basically the punchline of international cycling for decades. Just for context, the team was historically so poor, so underwhelming, that one of the top bike manufacturers in Europe actually refused to sell them bikes.
No way, seriously.
Yeah, seriously, they genuinely believed that seeing British riders using their bikes would actually harm their brand reputation. That's how low the baseline was.
Oh, okay. Talk about starting from zero or maybe even negative territory. So Brailsford gets hired to change this frankly pathetic trajectory. And he does it by committing fully to this philosophy of marginal gains. His theory was basically if you broke down everything related to riding a bike, every tiny component, and improved each one by just 1%. Those small gains would add up, they'd aggregate into a significant advantage.
And he looked at everything. We aren't just talking about the obvious stuff like the bike's aerodynamics or the rider's training schedule. He dug into details most high-performance teams would just ignore. Designing the perfect ergonomic bike seat, figuring out what type of massage gel worked best for muscle recovery.
I heard he even tested different cleaners for the floor of the mechanic's van.
Exactly, to ensure less dust settled on the finely tuned bikes. And, famously, having the riders bring their own pillows on road trips to guarantee a better night's sleep. Tiny things.
That detail about the pillows, that's actually crucial, isn't it? Because it highlights the commitment to the system over just, sheer motivation or talent. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. Just 5 years after he implemented the system, British cycling absolutely dominated the 2008 Beijing Olympics. They won something like 60% of the available gold medals.
60%. It's staggering. And that success just snowballed, right? It compounded. By the time the 2012 London Olympics came around, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. Plus, they went on to win 5 Tour de France titles in 6 years. It's just definitive proof that what starts as a small, maybe seemingly insignificant win or loss, it accumulates into something much, much bigger over time. Okay, so if that's the power of the end result, we really need to look at what sets that initial trajectory. And that brings us right into section 1. Why thinking about the slope of the curve, your direction, is way more important than just focusing on your current position on that curve.
It's a tough psychological shift to make, honestly, because we seem hardwired to look at immediate outcomes, instant gratification, instant validation. But if you want lasting success, our sources argue you should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results.
The financial analogy they used was pretty effective, I thought.
Yeah, that works well. If you're currently a millionaire, great result, obviously, but your spending habits mean you're burning through cash every month. Well, you're on a bad trajectory.
Right, the $1 million won't last if the system is broken.
Exactly. If you don't change the underlying system, that initial result is kind of meaningless. It's not going to end well. But conversely, if you're broke right now, a difficult result No doubt yet, you manage to commit to saving and investing even just a little bit of money every single month.
Yeah.
You're already on the path toward financial freedom. Even if you feel like you're moving slowly, the system is correct. The trajectory dictates the ultimate destination.
And that principle seems to be the foundation for any kind of lasting change. The source material argues pretty powerfully that true behavior change is fundamentally identity change. Why is that identity shift so critical? Is it more than just a motivational phrase?
Oh, it's much more. Motivation might get you to start a habit, sure. Like maybe you join a gym for the New Year resolution thing. But the only reason you actually stick with it month after month is because the habit becomes intrinsically linked to who you are. The improvement is just temporary until it integrates fully into your self-image. Think about it. If you try to lose weight but you haven't changed the core identity of someone who loves fast food and hates exercise, the moment friction hits a bad day, stress the old identity takes over and the habit collapses.
So the real shift isn't just about the external metric like pounds lost or books read. It's the fundamental change in how you see yourself.
Precisely. Instead of focusing only on the outcome, you focus on the identity. The goal isn't just to read one book. The goal is to become a reader.
Or not just run one marathon, but become a runner.
Exactly. When a difficult choice pops up, say, whether to stay in and write or go out with friends, you ask yourself, what would a writer do? The answer becomes obvious, right? And the habit, the action, flows much more easily from that identity.
Okay, but this sounds like where the real difficulty lies. Our sources stress that identity conflict is the single biggest barrier to positive change. How does that conflict actually, show up? And why does it derail otherwise good intentions?
It shows up subtly, often unconsciously. If a new positive habit conflicts with your existing comfortable self-image, you'll basically find ways to fail, even if you don't realize it. Imagine someone who constantly describes themselves as like, oh, I'm just not a morning person, or I have such a sweet tooth, I'm a natural snacker.
Yeah, I know people like that. Maybe I am people like that sometimes.
We all are, to some extent. They might try a new habit, waking up early, eating a healthy breakfast, but when that 6 a.m. alarm goes off, the identity of not a morning person screams louder. Why? Because we crave consistency with our deepest beliefs about ourselves. So unconsciously, they might hit snooze, sabotage the goal, just to preserve that familiar identity.
Wow. That must be the underlying reason why so many people get stuck in those cycles of trying, feeling guilty, then trying again. They rationally want the outcome to be healthy, to be productive, whatever, but deep down, achieving it conflicts with their current comfortable idea of who they are.
It's the comfort of the known self, isn't it? Progress actually requires continuously editing and expanding your identity. You can't get too attached to one fixed version of yourself. But the great news is, you reinforce the identity you want today with the habits you choose today. Every single time you show up for that run, even if it's short, you cast a vote for, I am a runner.
Hmm.
Ultimately, habits aren't just about the external measures of success, money, weight loss, promotions. They're fundamentally about becoming someone.
Okay, so if the identity shift is the North Star, the guiding principle, how do we actually chart the daily steps to get there? We need a system, right? And that brings us to the core mechanics of habit design in section 2.
Right. We need a system because habits are essentially just mental shortcuts learned from experience. They're memories of steps that worked before to solve a problem. They're basically the brain's efficiency hack. They reduce cognitive load, free up your conscious mind, which is a massive bottleneck, by the way. Once the basics of life, like brushing your teeth or driving to work, are handled automatically by habits, your conscious mind is free to focus on new stuff, creative challenges, complex problems.
And the science of how habits form breaks down into 4 simple steps. These are the foundation for the 4 laws of behavior change we'll discuss. Cue, craving, response, and reward. Can you walk us through the psychology of those 4 steps?
Sure. So the cue is the trigger. It's the first little indication that a reward might be nearby. It basically signals the brain, hey, pay attention. This situation led to something good last time.
Okay, the signal?
Then comes the craving. This is the really crucial second step. It's the motivational force that drives the whole loop. And here's a key distinction our sources emphasize. You don't actually crave the habit itself, but the change in state that habit delivers.
Do you give an example of that state change?
Yeah, definitely. Like you don't crave the physical act of brushing your teeth. You crave the feeling of a clean, minty mouth. That's the state change. You don't necessarily crave scrolling through social media. You crave the feeling of relief from boredom or maybe that little hit of social validation. That's the state change. Every craving, whether it's for a good habit or a bad one, is intrinsically linked to a desire to change your current internal state.
Got it. So Q, craving. Then what?
Then comes the response, which is the actual habit itself, the action you take. Brushing the teeth, smoking the cigarette, checking the phone. And finally, the reward. This is the outcome that satisfies the craving and, very importantly, signals back to the brain that this whole loop, this habit, is worth remembering and repeating in the future.
Okay. Q, craving, response, reward. So now we use the 4 laws of behavior change to essentially hack those steps for our benefit. Let's start with the first and third laws, which seem focused on setting things up right and making it easy.
Exactly. The first law is make it obvious. This tackles the cue part of the loop. The first challenge is dealing with all those non-conscious habits we have. If we're unaware of our cues and the automatic responses they trigger, we're basically just subject to them. As the psychologist Carl Jung put it, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. We need awareness and clarity first.
And one of the most effective tools for getting that clarity is using what the sources call implementation intentions, right? This is about being super specific.
Super specific. It means replacing vague goals like, I want to exercise more, with precise instructions for your brain. The formula is simple but powerful. I will behavior at time and location. That specificity makes it much, much easier to say yes to your commitment when the time comes, and frankly, easier to say no to potential derailments. If your goal is just exercise more, it's easy to rationalize putting it off. Oh, I'll do it later. I'm too tired now. But if the goal is I will do 20 push-ups at 7 a.m. in my kitchen, the mental load required to decide when and where is already gone. It makes the action almost automatic.
I really like the strategy of habit stacking too. That feels very practical. Linking a new behavior directly to a habit you already do every day.
Yeah, habit stacking is brilliant because it leverages consistency you already have. You don't need to find a new time or place in your crowded schedule. You just slot the new desired action right into the existing flow. The formula for that is, after current habit, I will new habit. Okay. So for someone trying to eat healthier, a good stack might be, when I serve myself a meal, current habit, I will always put veggies on my plate first, new habit. The cue, serving the meal, is already solid. The new habit, putting veggies first, is simple. And it automatically ensures a better start to the meal before they even get to the less healthy stuff.
It really highlights how much our environment design matters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Small changes in our surroundings, our context, can lead to really large changes in behavior over time just because we're so driven by cues.
Absolutely. We tend to think we respond rationally to circumstances, but often we're just responding automatically to the cues in our immediate context. It's subconscious a lot of the time. So you need to consciously design your environment so the cues for your good habits are obvious and visible, and the cues for your bad habits are, well, hidden or harder to access. If the TV remote is sitting right there on the arm of the couch, that's a powerful, obvious cue for a potentially bad habit hours of mindless TV watching.
Whereas if your running shoes are right by the door.
Exactly. If your keys are placed right next to your running shoes the night before, that's an obvious cue for a good habit going for that run. Our sources really emphasize that a stable environment where everything has a designated place and a purpose is an environment where good habits can form much more easily. Reduce the visual clutter, reduce the bad cues.
Okay, let's jump to the third law. Make it easy. This seems counterintuitive sometimes. We think we need more willpower, more motivation. But this law says, just remove the friction.
Right. Stop trying to pump up your motivation like crazy. The source material uses this great analogy of trying to force water through a bent garden hose.
Yeah, I remember that.
Most people think they need massive motivational pressure, cranking up the water pressure to get the habit to happen. But the truth is, it's usually way easier and more effective to just unbend the hose. Remove the friction, make the habit simple. And the best, most actionable way to do this is with the 2-minute rule.
Okay, the 2-minute rule. Doesn't this feel a little bit like cheating? If my big goal is, say, to study for 2 hours, but the rule says I only have to make the first 2 minutes ridiculously simple, like just opening my textbook, how does that actually help achieve the bigger goal? Doesn't that just let me off the hook?
It's a fair question, but the source material argues it's not about letting you off the hook. The first 2 minutes aren't about completing the whole task. They're about overcoming inertia. That's the key. The objective of the 2-minute rule is simply to show up and initiate the behavior, which reinforces the identity shift we talked about. So, study for class for 2 hours becomes simply open my notes. Run 3 miles becomes put on my running shoes and step outside. This creates what the source calls a gateway habit.
A gateway habit.
Yeah. Once you've actually opened your notes or once your shoes are tied and you're literally standing outside, it is monumentally easier to decide, okay, maybe I'll study for 20 minutes or maybe I'll just run around the block than it was when you were sitting on the couch just thinking about it. The hardest part of almost any task is just getting started. The 2-minute rule optimizes for starting.
That makes perfect sense when you frame it like that. It's not about the end productivity of those 2 minutes. It's about the consistency of starting and reinforcing the identity. Okay. Now, the inversion of this law is really interesting too. Making bad habits hard. This is about adding friction back in, but strategically.
Exactly. This involves deliberately inserting friction into the system for behaviors you want to avoid, often using what are called commitment devices. The source gives the amazing example of Victor Hugo, the author. Apparently, he forced himself to write The Hunchback of Notre Dame against a tight deadline by, well, it's pretty extreme. He collected all of his clothes, everything from suits to boots, and had an assistant lock them away in a large chest for months.
Wait, hold on. He literally locked himself in his study, naked.
Essentially, yeah. Or close to it. He was reportedly left with nothing suitable to wear in public but a large, maybe knitted shawl. Made him look ridiculous if you went out. So, lacking suitable clothes to go outdoors, he basically had no choice but to remain in his study and write furiously. The book got finished weeks ahead of schedule. He made the bad habit procrastination, going out, getting distracted, incredibly difficult, almost impossible. And the good habit writing became almost inevitable because leaving the house required overcoming massive effort and social friction.
That is definitely an extreme commitment device. But the principle holds for less dramatic actions, right? The key takeaway is structuring things, so it requires more effort to get out of the good habit or into the bad one than to just do the right thing.
Precisely. Practical examples. Schedule and pay for that yoga session way in advance. Make skipping it feel like wasting money adds friction to skipping. Or put a really complex parental control block on distracting websites that requires you to look up a long, cumbersome password every single time you want to access them. Adds friction to procrastinating online. When the bad habit is hard to perform and the commitment device removes the immediate easy option, adherence to the good habit skyrockets.
All right, that covers making it obvious and easy. Let's move to the fourth law. Make it satisfying. This tackles the reward part of the loop, and this is where that crucial time inconsistency problem comes into play. Why do we consistently choose instant gratification over delayed rewards, even when we know better?
Yeah, this is a fundamental challenge of human behavior. The problem is timing. The costs of good habits, like the effort of the gym, the discipline of saving money, the focus required for deep work, are experienced immediately in the present. But the reward, better fitness, financial security, project completion, is often deferred, sometimes way off into the future. Conversely, the reward of bad habits, that sugary donut, an hour of binge-watching TV, impulse shopping, is instantaneous. It feels good right now, and the costs, weight gain, wasted time, credit card debt, are deferred into the future. Usually, present you, seeking immediate comfort or pleasure, wins out over the interests of future you.
So we can't just rely on the distant promise of a good future to keep us going. We have to somehow manipulate the present experience of the habit.
That's exactly right. The cardinal rule of behavior change, according to our sources, is this: what is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. So to get a long-term habit to stick, especially one where the main benefit is delayed, you need to find a way to make it feel immediately successful and satisfying, even if it's just in a small way.
We need to basically inject an immediate reward into the process, while those bigger delayed rewards are accumulating slowly in the background. What's a good example of achieving that immediate satisfaction?
A really great example the source uses comes from a public health campaign in Karachi, Pakistan. It was led by a researcher named Dr. Stephen Luby, focused on promoting hand washing with soap to reduce disease. Simply educating people about germs and disease transmission didn't really work to change behavior consistently. They needed something more immediate, a positive sensory signal. They introduced Safeguard soap, and what made it effective wasn't just the antibacterial properties. The key was that the soap they provided foamed up really easily, and it smelled great.
So the actual act of hand washing stopped being just a chore to prevent future illness.
Exactly. It became slightly pleasurable, satisfying in the moment. Study participants frequently mentioned how much they liked the experience of using the soap, the smell, the luxurious foam. That immediate positive sensory feedback acted as the reward signal. It told the brain, hey, this felt good, this paid off right now, making it much more likely they'd repeat the behavior next time. Think about the minty taste of toothpaste, or the cool feeling of water after a hot run, or even just marking an X on your habit tracker. These all perform the same function, making the habit satisfying in the moment, which dramatically increases the odds it will stick long term.
Okay, we spent a good chunk of time focusing on internal optimization, building our own good habits, using these 4 laws. But now we need to shift gears and talk about external manipulation, how others can exploit the very same mental shortcuts we rely on every day. Section 3 is all about influence.
Yeah, this is crucial. Our sources really drive home the point that we are living under an immense information crush. Modern life just throws way too much data, too many choices at our conscious brains for us to process thoroughly all the time. This forces us to rely heavily on judgmental heuristics, mental shortcuts just to get through the day. And this often leads to a kind of automatic, sometimes mindless compliance, a sort of click-run mentality where we react based on a single salient piece of information rather than a careful analysis of the whole situation.
The famous example of the mother turkey really captures this click-run idea perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does. Ethologists found that a mother turkey will nurture and protect anything that makes the specific cheep cheep sound of her baby chicks. They even showed she would warmly embrace a stuffed polecat, a natural predator, if it had a small recorder inside playing that cheep cheep sound, but she'd attack the same stuffed polecat if it was silent. She responds automatically, mechanically, to that single stimulus feature, the sound ignoring the overall reality of the situation, which is that it's a dangerous predator. Humans, our sources argue, operate similarly far more often than we'd like to admit. We rely on trigger cues to simplify complex decisions, and skilled influencers know exactly which buttons to press.
Okay, let's unpack some of the most powerful principles of influence that exploit these shortcuts, starting with the contrast principle. How does that work?
The contrast principle governs how we perceive things when they're presented one after another. Our judgment of the second item is heavily influenced by the first. If you lift a light object first, then a heavy one, the heavy one feels even heavier than if you'd lifted it alone. The perception is relative based on the contrast. A classic application is used all the time by, say, car dealers or real estate agents.
Right. The car dealer waits until you've already agreed on the main price of the car, thousands and thousands of dollars, before they start suggesting the add-ons, like the upgraded sound system or the special paint protection.
Precisely. After you've just anchored your mind to a $30,000 decision, what's another $500 for rust proofing or $300 for floor mats? It seems almost trivial by contrast. The salesperson presents these options individually, making each one seem petty and small when compared mentally to the already agreed upon large price. It works incredibly well.
It really is like psychological jujitsu, using your own perception against you. Okay, next up, reciprocity. This feels like a really deeply ingrained cultural rule.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's fundamental to human society. We're trained from childhood to comply with the reciprocity rule: you give back what you receive. We desperately want to avoid the powerful social label of being a moocher, a freeloader, or someone who doesn't repay their debts. We feel a strong sense of obligation to repay favors, even favors we never asked for in the first place. Charitable organizations use this brilliantly when they send unsolicited gifts in the mail, like personalized address labels or greeting cards, along with their donation request.
Ah, right. And because you've received this small, unexpected gift, you feel a cultural pressure to reciprocate by sending a donation, even if you didn't want or need the label.
Exactly. It triggers that obligation. But the rule extends beyond just repaying favors. It also creates an obligation to repay concessions. And this is the basis for the extremely powerful rejection then retreat technique, also known sometimes as the door in the face technique. This is where an influencer makes a large request, one they know you'll probably reject. Then, after you say no, they immediately retreat to a smaller request, the one they actually wanted all along.
The classic example is the Boy Scouts selling tickets. First, he asks if you want to buy some $5 raffle tickets. When you decline, he immediately pivots. Okay, well, maybe you'd just like to buy one of our $1 candy bars then. Why does that retreat work so effectively?
Because his retreat from the large request to the small one is perceived as a concession by him. And the reciprocity rule creates pressure on you to respond with a concession of your own, namely, agreeing to the smaller request. You feel obligated to meet his concession with one of your own. But crucially, studies show this technique has a fascinating double benefit. Not only does it significantly increase compliance, more people buy the candy bar, but it also makes the target feel more responsible for and more satisfied with the final arrangement. They feel like, hey, I negotiated him down from $5 to $1. And a person who feels responsible for the terms of an agreement is far more likely to actually follow through on it and even comply with similar requests in the future.
Wow, that satisfaction part is subtle but powerful. Okay, moving on to liking and similarity. This seems pretty straightforward on the surface. We tend to say yes to people we know and like. But let's break down the factors that increase liking, which influencers can manipulate.
Sure. The first, maybe uncomfortable factor is simple physical attractiveness. It creates a halo effect. Research consistently shows that attractive individuals are automatically assigned other positive traits like talent, kindness, honesty, and intelligence, often completely unrelated to their actual qualities. They are simply more persuasive because of this automatic, unearned positive association.
That's depressing, but probably true. What's next?
Second is similarity. We like people who are like us. Shared opinions, personality traits, background, even lifestyle. This is now explicitly leveraged in modern influence training. Salespersons, for example, are often urged to subtly mimic or mirror their customers' posture, mood, and verbal style.
Does that mirroring thing actually work?
Oh, incredibly well, according to the research cited. Food servers who were trained to subtly repeat customers' orders verbatim or mimic their body language received significantly higher tips. Negotiators trained to imitate their opponent's language and style got measurably better outcomes in simulated negotiations. Even finding small, sometimes trivial points of similarity, like having the same first name or being from the same hometown, can significantly increase liking and compliance with a request. And the third major factor is praise. Compliments work. Even if the flattery seems obviously manipulative or insincere, it still tends to engender liking and compliance because, well, we have a deep fundamental hunger for affirmation.
It's amazing how often we fall for what the source called sly sincerity. Yeah. Okay, let's tackle social proof. This is that shortcut that basically says if lots of other people are doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
Exactly. We view an action as more correct or appropriate when we see others performing it. It's usually a convenient and reliable shortcut. If everyone is suddenly running out of a building, you should probably run too, right? Don't stop to analyze why. The danger comes when the social evidence is deliberately faked or distorted, like bartenders salting their tip jars with a few dollar bills at the start of the night to make it look like tipping is the norm, or restaurants citing certain menu items as most popular to subtly increase purchases of those dishes. But the principle of social proof becomes especially powerful under conditions of uncertainty. When we are unsure of ourselves, when the situation is ambiguous, we are most likely to look to the actions of others, especially similar others, to decide how we should behave.
And this reliance on others in times of uncertainty brings us to the really tragic, extreme example used in the source, the Jonestown mass suicide.
Yeah, it's a horrific illustration, but it powerfully demonstrates the principle. The leader, Jim Jones, masterfully leveraged uncertainty. The relocation of the entire People's Temple community to an isolated, unfamiliar jumble settlement in Guyana created conditions of profound physical and social uncertainty. The followers were cut off from their past lives, dropped into a completely alien environment they knew nothing about. This created immense psychological pressure and confusion. This deep uncertainty made them exceptionally vulnerable to social proof. They looked to each other, and ultimately to the directions of the leader, for cues on how to behave in this scary, ambiguous new reality. It pushed them toward compliant, herd-like responses.
Our sources also detailed another unsettling phenomenon related to social proof and similarity, the Werther effect.
Right. The Werther effect describes the documented phenomenon of copycat suicides following highly publicized suicide stories. Sociologist David Phillips analyzed decades of U.S. suicide statistics and found a disturbing pattern. Within about 2 months after every front-page suicide story ran, an average of 58 more people than usual took their own lives, people who likely wouldn't have otherwise. And the effect was strongest in geographical regions where the original suicide story received the most intense publicity. Crucially, the copycat victims tended to be similar in age and circumstance to the person in the original story. This demonstrates a grim form of peer suasion. When people are troubled and uncertain, they look to the actions of similar others for validation, even for the most extreme actions like suicide.
Chilling. Okay, finally, in this section, we have the principle of authority.
Yes, the power of authority. We have a deeply ingrained, almost reflexive tendency in our culture to obey figures of authority. We often accept, pretty unthinkingly, the statements and directions of individuals who simply appear to be legitimate authorities. Rather than critically evaluating their arguments, their evidence, or even their actual qualifications in the relevant domain, we often allow ourselves to be swayed simply by the symbols of authority.
And those symbols, titles, uniforms, even expensive clothes or cars
Yeah.
can often overwhelm the actual substance of the message. They can even shift our basic perception of reality, right?
It's quite incredible how powerful these symbols are. The sources cite studies showing just that. In one experiment, the very same man was introduced to different college classes using different academic titles. When he was introduced as a professor, the students later estimated his height to be, on average, 2.5 inches taller than when he was introduced to an identical class simply as a student. His perceived status literally changed their perception of his physical size. Symbols like official-looking uniforms, think guard uniforms or doctors' white coats, or the trappings of success like expensive business suits or luxury cars, can trigger an automatic deference. We stop processing the information critically and just kind of follow the symbol, click, run.
The most shocking example of this, the one that really stuck with me, was the medical error study involving nurses. It suggests this deference to authority can actually override years of professional training and knowledge.
It is deeply concerning, yes. Researchers conducted a study where a person claiming to be a doctor, someone the nurses had never met or spoken to before, phoned a hospital ward. This doctor ordered the nurse answering the phone to administer an obviously excessive and dangerous dose, 20 milligrams, of an unauthorized drug called aspartame, which was actually a fake experimental drug, to a specific patient. Hospital policy clearly forbade taking such instructions over the phone. The drug was unauthorized and the dosage was dangerously high, clearly labeled as double the maximum daily limit on the drug's own packaging. Yet, in the experiment, a staggering 95% of the nurses went straight to the medicine cabinet to get the drug and were heading towards the patient's room to administer it before being stopped by a hidden observer.
95%.
Yeah,
Despite all those red flags.
95%. They seem to commit the potentially lethal medical error, overriding their deep professional knowledge and common sense simply because the request came from someone using the title doctor over the phone. Their brain just clicked authority and ran with the instruction, bypassing critical thinking.
That's terrifying. So, given how powerful these symbols are, how do we defend ourselves against this kind of manipulation?
Well, the sources suggest a two-pronged approach. First, question the authorities' credentials. Is this person truly an expert in the specific domain they're speaking about? Or are they just leveraging a general title or symbol? Second, and maybe more importantly, question their trustworthiness. What are this expert's potential motives in this situation? How trustworthy can I expect them to be? Do they have something to gain by my compliance? Our sources recommend paying special attention to experts who occasionally seem to argue slightly against their own self-interest. For example, if a waiter admits a slightly cheaper dish on the menu is actually better than a more expensive one he could have pushed, he subtly establishes himself as a trustworthy informant. By seeming to sacrifice his immediate financial interests, bigger bill, bigger tip, he builds credibility. This makes you far more likely to trust his subsequent, perhaps more self-serving recommendations, like for an expensive wine or dessert. Look for that small act against self-interest as a potential sign of trustworthiness, but always stay critical.
Okay, so if the first three sections really focus on designing effective personal habits and then defending ourselves against external influence attempts. Section 4 brings us to the absolute core system, the biological foundation that underlies our capacity for all of it, sleep. And the picture painted by the sources is stark. The World Health Organization has apparently declared a global sleep loss epidemic, especially in industrialized nations.
That's right. In places like the US, the UK, Japan, South Korea countries, where average sleep time has declined most dramatically over the last century or so, we are also seeing the greatest increases in rates of major physical diseases like Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and also mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, and suicidality. That old macho maxim, I'll sleep when I'm dead, it's tragically unfortunate because the overwhelming scientific evidence shows that shorter sleep directly predicts a shorter lifespan and certainly a lower quality of life while you're alive. Humans are, sadly, the only species that will deliberately deprive themselves of sleep without a legitimate external reason, like danger or starvation. We do it voluntarily, and the consequences are devastating.
Let's dive into the mechanics of this absolutely foundational system. Our sources describe human beings as essentially solar-powered. What does that mean in terms of sleep regulation?
It refers to our circadian rhythm, our internal 24-hour clock, which is strongly tethered to the light-dark cycle. The hormone melatonin is key here. It's released by the brain in darkness to help signal and orchestrate the timing of sleep. But as dawn arrives, even faint sunlight entering the brain through the eyes, yes, even through closed eyelids, acts like a powerful brake pedal. It signals the brain to instantaneously shut off melatonin release. This sudden absence of melatonin is the primary signal that informs the brain and body that the period of sleep is over, time to wake up.
And yet we often try to fight this natural cycle, especially the sleepiness part, with caffeine. This leads to what the sources called the infamous caffeine trap and that awful crash later.
Mm.
Can you explain the mechanism behind that crash?
Yeah, the caffeine crash. It's important to understand that caffeine doesn't actually give you energy in the way food does. What it does is cleverly block the receptors in your brain for a chemical called adenosine. Adenosine is often called the sleep pressure chemical. It builds up naturally in your brain every moment you're awake. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates, the sleepier you feel. Now, caffeine works by essentially sticking itself into those adenosine receptors, blocking the adenosine from binding and signaling sleepiness so you feel less tired. But here's the key. While the caffeine is blocking those receptors, the adenosine doesn't stop building up. It continues to accumulate in the background, unseen. Eventually, your liver breaks down the caffeine barrier. When that happens, you experience a vicious backlash. A sudden flood of all that accumulated adenosine hits the now available receptors all at once. This creates that immediate, forceful urge to sleep that we call the caffeine crash. You weren't just getting tired gradually, you got hit with a massive wave of deferred sleep debt all at once.
Wow, okay. So caffeine is really just masking the sleepiness, not eliminating it. The sources also make it incredibly clear that sleep itself is anything but an idle or passive state. Our brains are incredibly active. Let's distinguish between the two primary phases, NREM and REM sleep. What happens during deep NREM sleep?
Deep non-rapid eye movement, or NREM sleep, particularly the deeper stages 3 and 4, is far from idle. It's actually an epic display of synchronized neural collaboration. Huge populations of neurons fire together in slow, powerful brainwaves. And it's primarily during deep NREM sleep that essential memory consolidation happens. Think of NREM as a crucial courier service. It selectively moves important memory packets, facts, and skills learned during the day from the brain's temporary, vulnerable short-term storage, primarily the hippocampus, to more permanent, secure, long-term storage sites distributed throughout the cortex. If you learn something new during the day and then don't get sufficient deep NREM sleep that night, you essentially lose access to or fail to properly solidify those new memories. Sleep is critical for learning.
And the power of this NREM consolidation phase is tied to those rapid bursts of electrical activity the sources mentioned, called sleep spindles.
Exactly. Sleep spindles are short, powerful bursts of brain activity that occur primarily during stage 2 NREM sleep, which precedes the deepest stages. Research has linked the density and activity of these spindles directly to the restoration of learning capacity. Studies involving naps, for instance, show that participants who exhibit higher spindle activity during their nap gain a significant learning advantage, sometimes around 20% better performance on learning tasks afterward, compared to those who napped but had fewer spindles or didn't nap at all. So the brain isn't just resting during NREM, it's actively processing information and refreshing its ability to absorb new information the following day.
Okay, that's NREM. Then there's the other major phase, REM sleep, often called dream sleep. The sources refer to it as the nighttime theater. What's its role?
REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, is a very different brain state. It's characterized by faster brain waves, similar to when we're awake, paralyzed muscles, thankfully, and, of course, vivid dreaming. REM sleep appears vital for several functions, including emotional processing and regulation, but also, significantly, for creativity and making insightful memory associations. During REM, your brain seems to actively test out connections between distant, non-obvious pieces of stored information. It fuses disparate sets of knowledge together in novel ways. This is likely why our dreams often feel bizarre and illogical. They're mashups of recent experiences, old memories, emotional tones, all woven together. This process of forging remote connections during REM sleep is believed to be crucial for problem solving and creativity. It's what allows you to sometimes wake up in the morning and suddenly have that aha moment, finding the creative solution to a problem you were stuck on the day before. Your dreaming brain was working on it overnight.
It's incredible how much critical work is happening while we're unconscious, which makes it all the more alarming when this foundational system fails. The consequences of sleep deficiency are immediate and severe, right? They impact every aspect of the systems for self-improvement we discussed earlier.
Absolutely devastatingly so. Just looking at the physical side first, numerous studies consistently show that getting anything less than about 8 hours of sleep, even just for one night, significantly reduces the time it takes for an athlete to reach physical exhaustion, often by 10 to 30%. It also measurably decreases muscle strength, impairs vertical jump height, reduces peak running speed, and even impairs the body's ability to cool itself effectively through sweating. You are instantly a less capable physical being when you're tired.
And the danger isn't just to our personal performance. The risk to society when people are sleep deprived, especially behind the wheel, is frankly terrifying.
It truly is. The data on drowsy driving is chilling. Driving after having only 4 hours of sleep causes the same level of driving impairments, specifically measured by things like lane deviations, reaction time, micro sleeps as driving legally drunk with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08%.
The same impairment as being legally drunk,
Yeah.
just from 4 hours of sleep.
Yes, about 6 times more likely to have off-road deviations compared to being well rested. And even worse, combining alcohol consumption with sleep loss is not simply additive, the impairment becomes multiplicative. Because the two deficits, alcohol's effect and sleep loss's effect, are hitting the brain in completely different, non-overlapping ways, the combined impairment can lead to performance nearly 30 times worse than driving sober and well rested. It's an incredibly dangerous combination.
And beyond the physical and risk aspects, sleep loss throws our emotions completely out of whack, doesn't it? Making adherence to rational habits, like the ones we discussed needing for the fourth law, made it satisfying, almost impossible.
This is absolutely critical for understanding why habits break down when you're tired. A lack of sufficient sleep fundamentally hobbles the rational part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is your executive function center, responsible for logical thought, impulse control, long-term planning, emotional regulation. It's the part you need to make good decisions, stick to your goals, and defer gratification. At the very same time that sleep loss dampens the prefrontal cortex, it actually amplifies activity in more primal, emotional, deep brain centers, like the amygdala, which generates strong emotions like fear and anger, and the striatum, which is linked to impulsivity, reward seeking, and addiction. So the underslept brain becomes emotionally hyperreactive. It swings excessively to both negative extremes, more anxiety, irritability, and even positive extremes, more impulsivity, risky reward seeking. It leads to poor judgment and terrible decision making, completely undermining rational habit formation.
We see the catastrophic cost of this kind of impaired judgment in high-stakes professions, like medicine. The statistics cited were horrifying.
They are truly horrifying, and they highlight a massive systemic problem. Studies looking at medical residents working traditional, grueling, 30-hour continuous shifts found they commit 36% more serious medical errors compared to when they work shorter, more reasonable shifts. Even more alarmingly, in the intensive care unit, those same sleep-deprived residents made a staggering 460% more diagnostic mistakes than when they were well rested. Tragically, based on error rates, the sources estimate that roughly 1 in 20 medical residents will unintentionally kill a patient due to a fatigue-related error during their training period. It underscores sleep debt not just as a performance issue, but as a massive ethical crisis in healthcare.
And just to nail this point home, even if you try to compensate for lost sleep using sleeping pills like Ambien, the sources suggest you might actually be undermining your memory consolidation, not helping it.
That's the disturbing finding about the memory erasure effect. Animal studies directly compared the effects of natural sleep versus drug-induced sleep, using Ambien zolpidem, after a learning session. They found that while natural sleep significantly strengthened the memory connections formed during learning, the Ambien-induced sleep not only failed to provide those memory consolidation benefits, but actually appeared to weaken those newly formed connections by about 50%. It seems these sedative hypnotic drugs disrupt the precise neurochemical processes required for NREM memory consolidation. So while they might induce unconsciousness, they don't provide the same restorative memory benefits and may even be detrimental to learning.
Okay, given this overwhelming evidence for the necessity of sleep, let's quickly touch on some common modern sleep disruptors and, more importantly, simple evidence-based solutions people can implement immediately. What's the single biggest technological threat to our natural sleep rhythm?
Without a doubt, it's the prevalence of blue LED light, predominantly emitted from our phones, tablets, computers, and energy-efficient lighting, especially in the evening hours. Remember those light receptors in the eye that signal daytime to the brain and suppress melatonin? They are most sensitive specifically to light in the blue spectrum. Research shows that evening exposure to blue LED light has approximately twice the harmful impact on nighttime melatonin suppression compared to the warm yellow spectrum light emitted by old-fashioned incandescent bulbs. Using these devices close to bedtime sends a powerful, incorrect signal to your brain that it's still high noon, making it much harder to fall asleep and reducing the quality of sleep you eventually get.
So the advice to put down the phone and dim the lights an hour or two before bed is really critical, scientifically grounded advice. What about environment design for sleep? We talked about cues for habits earlier. How does the environment affect sleep itself?
Temperature is a huge factor. A cool bedroom environment generally promotes better sleep. This is because your core body temperature naturally needs to drop by about 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep and stay asleep. Studies have shown that helping this process along can be really effective. For instance, artificially warming just the hands and feet slightly, maybe with socks or a hot water bottle by just about 1 degree Fahrenheit, helps dilate the blood vessels in the skin surface there. This draws heat out from the body's core, actively assisting the cool down process needed for sleep onset. The effect is surprisingly powerful. In one study, this slight warming of extremities allowed people to fall asleep about 20% faster, and in another, it improved the time it took clinical insomniacs to fall asleep by almost 25%.
Wow, that's a simple but potentially very effective hack. And finally, let's talk about perhaps the cruelest of modern inventions when it comes to sleep, the alarm clock, and especially the snooze button.
Ah, yes. The standard blaring alarm clock. Being jolted awake like that, especially out of deep sleep, causes an explosive spike in both blood pressure and heart rate. It's literally triggering the body's fight or flight stress response unnecessarily. It's a sudden, repeated cardiovascular assault first thing in the morning, and using the snooze button, that just makes it worse. Each time you hit snooze and drift back off, only to be shocked awake again 9 minutes later, you inflict that cardiovascular spike, that jolt of stress hormones, again and again and again within a very short period. Our sources describe it as a form of self-inflicted, low-grade abuse to your heart and nervous system every morning. If you absolutely must use an alarm clock, the single best change you can make for your health is to get rid of the snooze function entirely. Set it for when you actually need to get up, and then get up.
Okay, to try and synthesize this entire deep dive now, let's explicitly connect the dots. We've talked about the systematic improvement of habits using the 4 laws in Section 2, and the defense against external influence using principles like reciprocity and authority in Section 3. How does the foundational necessity of sleep from Section 4 underpin or potentially undermine all of that?
It underpins everything. Absolutely everything. Think about it. The prefrontal cortex, that rational part of your brain we keep mentioning, it's critical for making wise long-term decisions, for resisting impulses, for deferring gratification, all essential components for successfully applying the 4 laws of behavior change, especially making things satisfying in the long run. And that prefrontal cortex is one of the very first brain structures to degrade significantly in function when you lose even moderate amounts of sleep. So, if you're tired, you simply lack the mental resources, the executive control, to override the immediate desire for satisfaction that drives bad habits. You lack the willpower to make it easy by resisting friction. Similarly, you lack the sharp critical judgment needed to properly filter and defend against the manipulation cues we discussed, like questioning authority or recognizing counterfeit social proof. Your tired brain is just much more susceptible to those click-run responses. Honestly, the single most high leverage habit anyone can focus on for overall improvement is optimizing their sleep system. Get that right, and everything else becomes easier.
And it seems like some organizations are finally starting to recognize and even quantify the value of a well-rested workforce. The example of Aetna Insurance Company offering bonuses for sleep was quite striking.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Aetna offers its employees financial bonuses up to $500 per year simply for logging 20 consecutive nights of 7 or more hours of sleep, tracked via fitness devices. They recognize that paying people to prioritize rest is actually cheaper in the long run than paying for the consequences of sleep deprivation. Things like increased healthcare costs, more errors, lower productivity, higher accident rates.
The CEO, Mark Bertolini, put it very clearly, didn't he?
He did. He said something like, being present in the workplace and making better decisions has a lot to do with our business fundamentals. It also reinforces the role of data and feedback we talked about with habits. Tracking physiological health metrics, whether it's sleep duration, steps taken, blood pressure tends to increase long-term compliance and adherence to healthy habits because we respond well to seeing that quantifiable progress or lack thereof. It makes the invisible visible.
Okay, so we started by establishing that successful people often stick with their crucial daily habits, like training or practicing, largely because they learn to handle the inherent boredom of consistency doing the same important lifts or drills over and over again. But here's a final provocative thought, maybe connecting everything. What if the secret to handling that boredom, to maintaining the discipline and focus required by the four laws of behavior change day after day, isn't just about finding more passion or motivation, but simply about being consistently, fundamentally well rested?
That is perhaps the ultimate question of sustainable high performance, isn't it? Sleep loss demonstrably compromises every cognitive faculty we rely on for discipline, focus, and good judgment. And it has profound ethical consequences too, which we only touched on. Our sources show that sleep deprivation doesn't just increase minor things like lying and dishonesty. Most disturbingly, it also dramatically increases doubles or even quadruples the likelihood that an otherwise innocent, upstanding individual will make a false confession to a crime they did not commit when under pressure or interrogation. It highlights that sleep, or the lack of it, isn't just the greatest performance enhancer known to humankind, it's also arguably the most potent, readily available mind-altering tool. What we manage to achieve, or indeed who we manage to become during our waking hours, depends almost entirely on the quality and quantity of what happens while we are completely unconscious at night.
A powerful truth worth diving deeply into our own lives for. Just maybe make sure you get a solid 8 hours of sleep after contemplating it.